As a practitioner, I feel that it's important to practice what I preach. I've been referring clients to pelvic floor physical therapists or pelvic PTs for years, and yet never been to one myself. I never had any reasons to think from a symptomatic standpoint that I had enough. And that was a big part of prioritizing myself and why I had put one off for so long. But I couldn't have been more wrong. In this week's episode, I share my experience with pelvic PT and how energetic and physical aspects work together for shifts in your body and your life, that you would have never thought possible. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat. It's solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. So I am giving a little bit of an anecdotal journey today. So you'll get a juicy deep dive into Adrienne's journey with all of this. And I hope that it acts as an invitation to some of you to pursue other ways of looking at your emotional body and check out a pelvic floor PT. So I wanted to talk about my work with pelvic PT. Recently, there was an episode that came out, Emotions in the Pelvis, with Dr. Emily Wilson. And after we had that conversation, to her energy and the intuitive work that she does as part of her approach to working with people in their pelvic floor health and in their journeys, unpacking some of the things in that junk room that she was talking about in the episode. So please check out the Emotions in the Pelvis with Dr. Emily Wilson first, because it's going to make this episode make a lot more sense. So I made an appointment with Emily. I had not been to a pelvic floor PT. To be really honest, hadn't had one since I had my daughter. I had had some Ayurveda abdominal massage done. I see a chiropractor on a regular basis, an acupuncturist, but pelvic PT, even though I've always recommended my clients go see them, I never had any of the mechanical stuff like leaking when I sneeze or having a hard time to hold my bodily functions. So I never really thought that I needed one. So, and I know that there's a lot of people in that camp, which is exactly why I thought that it would be really powerful to one, walk my talk and go see a pelvic PT and see what they could tell me about what was going on inside of my body, but also so that I could talk to people in a meaningful way about what the pelvic PT journey could potentially look. Didn't have any glaring symptoms that said, yeah, I probably have some pelvic floor dysfunction. I should go see someone. It turns out that I actually had some stuff going on I didn't even realize. It wasn't presenting with life-changing symptoms, meaning needing to wear a pad or a liner, moving around, I leak, or anything of that nature, but there were some things that were showing up for me. The biggest challenge that I was having actually when I went in is the fact that I started having some tightness in my left hip, which is making it kind of difficult to put on socks. which was super frustrating and made me feel wicked old considering I just came through another birthday. So I went in, and really my only complaint was, hey, I'd really like to successfully put on my socks. And through the course of my conversation with her, she asked me some things that I hadn't thought to look at as potential areas that there could be any issues. So, whether you've had a baby or not, life, tension, trauma, stress, all of those kinds of things can affect your pelvic floor function. And kinds of things can affect your pelvic floor function. And if things aren't expanding and contracting, they don't have the flexibility that they need. We as women, we hold a lot of our emotions in our womb space. We hold them here because this is the seat of our creative energy. It's the seat of our identity. You know, whether we're deciding to create life and make a baby, or we're deciding to create a business, change our career, create a life for ourselves, right? Whether that's with a partner or not, it doesn't matter. You know, all of our careers from this womb space, it's incredibly important. And so, you know, in the show, Emily had talked about unpacking the junk room, and that we hold a lot of emotions and past stuff. It doesn't even have to be in this lifetime. It can be other lifetimes, as she talked about it in the program. But we hold a lot of stuff in this area, and that can create energetic blockages for all kinds of things. It doesn't necessarily have to manifest itself as physical symptoms. It could be emotional symptoms. It could be painful sex. It could be the inability to orgasm. It could be having difficulty with self-expression. There's a whole bunch of things that could be elements in this junk room, right? So I, figured that there was probably something connecting my hip tightness, and the fact that I've been in this big change and transition in the way that the practice is starting to move through the world. And in some ways, I'm comfortable with it because I feel like education is literally the foundational component that sing in their lives, and why they have period problems, why they have fertility issues, why life transitions are difficult, healing processes are not as effective. Like, I really truly believe that education and the lack of information that we get from day one of our first cycle through most of our reproductive life is a big reason why we have as many challenges as we do. So I took a look at, what am I seeing for symptoms? There's got to be a connection here to go see her because I am close enough to where she is located in Portland, Maine. If you are in New England, she is 110% worth the drive. There are a lot of great pelvic PTs nationwide, and Emily did provide me with some links to places that she had received some of her and cannot go see Dr. Emily. You can look for practitioners with similar types of experience that work in this pelvic PT area that might be local to where you are in the country or internationally. So do check out the show notes. Emily was wonderful and provided me with the directories of a couple of places that she has received some additional training that does influence the way she works with people. But I can tell you from my perspective that having that energetic component was exactly what pelvic PT is more of I have this pain, or I'm having pain during sex. Can we work on the physical side of it? And they're not ready for that energetic deep dive. I am at a point in my life and in my career where I really felt like I needed that extra energetic love, so to speak, to help me move through some of the things that were creatively holding me back. I am really excited about the practice moving in a more educational space. But for anyone who knows me, I'm a rather introverted, kind of shy. Hard for me to push myself out of my shell into an area that I'm not as comfortable with to share all of this information that I have. But I feel that it is so darn important to our health, our well being, the way we move through the world, how we feel about ourselves. All of those move through the world, how we feel about ourselves, all of those kinds of things, just like not apologizing for being a cyclical being. Well, if we understand that we're cyclical, then it doesn't end up making us feel like we're failing all the time or failing at least once a month because, right? So I feel so passionate about those things and that education and teaching women about their bodies, how they work, how they move through the world, and how they can optimize the way that they move through the world to be more efficient, have fewer period problems. This has been efficient, have fewer period problems. This has become, as I've said to my husband a few times, this is the hill I'm gonna die on, right? Because I really do feel like this is where the transformation for women and women's health is going to really take root and take place. But it has come with its own blockaging for me, which, having my voice heard, like it is for a lot of women, having my voice heard has been a little bit of a trigger for me. It's been uncomfortable to put myself out there that way because it's not a way that I have historically moved through the world, right? And I've done it as a protective mechanism. I've historically moved through the world, right? And I've done it as a protective mechanism. And this is one of the things that was unpacked out of my junk room. So, yes, there was definitely a conversation. We talked about what was working, what was not. We talked about, how I felt optimally. Did I feel like I had blockages, but maybe, something that I feel stuck. Like I hear that from my clients a lot. I feel stuck. I don't know why. I just know that something isn't working right in my body. And I work with that stuckness in my body. And I work with that stuckness, that quote unquote stuckness, a lot with people in my practice. But practitioners need practitioners, right? I've jokingly said a few times, I wish I had a me to care for me. And I know that there are quite a few practitioners that feel that way because, are unique to us and it shapes the way that we look at people, we look at experiences, just like the conversation that I had with Leah Shurton about having somebody make eye contact with you at a practitioner's office as part of informed consent and feeling like a person. Like all we had in our lives shape how we show up as practitioners, right? And so, when you find a practitioner that you really connect with, it's invaluable because you feel like you can be held in a really meaningful way. And even though I'm a practitioner and I hold that space for people, it could hold that space for me as well. So, especially not only hold that space for me as well, but also hold such a vulnerable space, right? Because we hold all of this creative energy in our womb space, but a lot of us, part of what blocks us is past trauma, grief, loss, all those kinds of things. They stand as roadblocks in the way to what it is that we want to get out of our lives, whether that's a baby, whether that's a healthier menstrual cycle, whether that's the job that we've been working really hard for. It doesn't matter what it is that we're trying to reach towards, right? So when we have these kinds of blockages, our body shows up. I read this really cool book called Stalking Wild SOAS. And I'll include the link for it in the show notes because it's a great book. But Stalking Wild SOAS, the author talks about your SOAS as being like a biointelligent being and that it oftentimes is like that energetic sensory receptor. And so there's a lot of times that people will start having like tightness in their hips or things like that. And it's because their psoas is like pulling inward and guarding them. And that's actually one of the reasons why my hip was bothering me. starting to put myself out there in a way that made me feel more vulnerable, made my body physically, not intentionally, but physically, my body recoiled on itself. It pulled itself inward to guard my soft underbelly, right? So, my first appointment with Emily, I really felt like there was this huge breaking open, and I felt a little raw and vulnerable afterwards, not gonna lie. But she really, even though there was some physical adjustments that were made, we had had this deeper dive in terms of conversation. As we were doing certain types of work, I had images come up and I had emotions come up. And I realized that as she was touching different parts of my abdomen, my back, where all of these muscular structures connect into different places and are interwoven. I guess that's a good word with other areas of the body. All of a sudden, I totally didn't expect to see images, pictures, having emotions come to the surface. Like, it really kind of caught me off guard, but it was the unlocking that I needed. I stopped getting laryngitis every time I went, or laryngitis looking symptoms. It was totally an energetic block. But I would go to record a podcast living in my throat. I'm like, what is going on right now? Or my voice disappeared entirely. And that was really frustrating. I had no idea, and I didn't put together at the time that there was this energetic piece that was feeding the reason why my body was showing up in that way. And so while the appointment started in a very clinical and more of a black and white kind of, you have this muscular structure, it's a little tight, we're going to do this release kind of thing. As that started happening, the unique, beautiful part of what Emily brought to my appointment with her was that then she started asking questions as she was doing these releases. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? Which one made me feel held? It made me feel seen, which is something that I try very hard to hold. Felt so good to be on the receiving end of that same kind of love and attention, especially working with such a vulnerable area of my body. Because the Western allopathic model is very invasive. Like, I have clients that come to me with pelvic trauma because they had a colposcopy done and now they can't be intimate with a partner. Like, this is not unique. This is a very common shared experience with a lot of women. And I'm sorry if any of this is triggering for anyone who is listening, but a lot of medical intervention is very triggering for a lot of people, particularly if you have to have recurring tests done or, things like that. It's hard. And we hold all of that. I saw this really great post on Instagram. I'm probably going to share it to my of it. It was a brilliant post. And it says that emotions and energy are our energy and they will mastitize if they're not addressed. And it's totally true. I see emotions showing up in people's body as fibroids, repressed emotions, right? Either a loss of voice or not feeling safe, whether it's in their relationship or they've had stuff in their past that's made them not feel safe. The body creates things like that as a safeguard. And I could do a whole episode on that, and I will coming up. But, just knowing that kind of energy or stifling our voice and cramming that stuff down into our system is how our junk room gets filled up in the first place. And all of us have a junk room. Even when we're very well adjusted, we're very in tune, we do a lot of personal growth work or have a junk room. And we might be in various stages or relationships with that junk room. We may be gaining better perspective, have a healthier relationship with it, but we all have a junk room. And I personally know that I've done a ton of work. I've worked with Reiki practitioners. I've worked with other energetic professionals. I've worked with tons of people to deal with my junk room. And yet, I never had anything address my junk room quite in the same way as pelvic PT did, as pelvic PT did. And some of these physical releases that were being done because I had muscles that were tight or my pelvic floor was just a little too tight and it was holding all my organs up higher, like my digestion has been drastically improved all over that elimination. Like it's been really mind-boggling actually. The things that I didn't realize were not working optimally until I started doing this work. So in some of these releases, as I was essentially, she was unlocking emotions that I was holding in my system. Actually, she was unlocking emotions that I was holding in my system. And they were really powerful. It's not everybody's experience to have big emotional releases when they go to pelvic PT, but I can tell you my personal experience, I had probably some of the most powerful cries I've ever had after a cathartic release kind of way. And then to sit down and steam after having had that kind of physical release in the office. And then I had more release that would come afterwards. I felt lighter. I felt brighter. I felt like I can articulate myself better. I felt like I can articulate myself better. My relationship with my family has shifted because your energy shifts and your vibration shifts, and then things shift around you. It's really been an incredibly transformative experience for me. Working with the muscles and the energy that's being stored in tight spaces and releasing some of those things really does change the way that you move through the world and the way that you show up. That you show up. I am so incredibly grateful that I finally made the time for myself because, when you're a practitioner, if any of you who are listening are practitioners, you're probably going to be nodding at this. But, you tend to kind of put nodding at this, but, you tend to kind of put yourself a little bit lower on the priority list because you're caring for other people, you're holding that space for other people. It's a big part of your calling as a practitioner, and it brings you a lot of joy. And yet, at the same time, it is really helping people, and we are, but prioritizing our own care can sometimes be difficult because we're working on fitting in others to be able to help as many people as we can, right? So I finally prioritized myself and said, okay, this is the practitioner that I think is going to hold the space for me. And when you're choosing a practitioner, particularly for pelvic PT, make sure they resonate with you. When you're looking at a pelvic floor practitioner, they have to make you feel held. They have to make you feel held. There is so much in the allopathic model that we don't feel seen, we don't feel heard, and we feel like a number. And because of that phenomenon, pelvic floor PTs, they're literally the angels among us because you want this to be that opening and transformative experience for you. Whether you subscribe to a more black and white allopathic approach, and that feels better because of the structure. There are pelvic PTs that work more in that way. But don't be surprised when they are doing some of the muscle releases that you may feel some things. And I'm not talking about the feeling of them doing the release. I'm talking about emotions that come up into the release at all. And, in talking with Dr. Emily in terms of how she came to this work and the fact that she was working in that more sterile clinical type approach in the early part of her career. And as she was working with people, she was finding that there was a connection and a very deep connection between this energetic holding in this part of the body for women and why their bodies were symptomatic in the way that they were. And it was a big catalyst of how she ended up changing the way that she shows up for her patients in her practice and the tools that she's added to her toolkit since then. And so there are practitioners out there. Find one that practices in a way that makes you feel safe and makes you feel safe and makes you feel held. But I assure you, the deep transformational capability, possibility, opening that can happen with pelvic PT, particularly for women, because we hold so much of our identity here, you know, plays into how we feel about ourselves. If people have recurrent miscarriage, this can be a huge source of grief. And you hold that grief there and the imprint of those losses there. Emily in the appointment talks about the fact that you do an armoring around while she's working on the way that the body is physically showing up. Because, the two of us both practice in a way that we feel that emotions and energies show up in your system in physical ways, right? It's one of the reasons I'm a Chinese medicine practitioner is because I love the fact that it accounts for all parts of the cookie. You're not ingredients of a cookie. And that's one of the hard parts about the Western model is everything is so siloed is you have to go to one practitioner for your nose. You go to one practitioner for your stomach. You go to one practitioner for your boobs. Like you're not a person. You're like a sum of parts. And that's not how we work, and so accounting for the emotional and energetic side of it, in my perspective, is a much better clinical approach to everything because if stressed out about a procedure, it's not going to go quite as well. If somebody feels held and safe with the practitioner who's doing the procedure, the outcome is going to be better. Right. So our emotional state really does influence the way our body shows up in the world. And so I found that pelvic PT has been one of the deepest unlockings that I've had in terms of moving past trauma. I have trauma in my past on a bunch of different levels, and being able to move that out of my system, I actually feel like I have more space in my abdomen. And I didn't even realize that I was constricted in that way. So I just wanted to kind of share my experience with pelvic PT and how transformational it's been for me. And how transformational it's been for me. I thought it would be a really good follow up to that really beautiful conversation that I had with Dr. Emily a couple of episodes ago because we do hold so much here and we don't talk about it that way. And yet men and women are emotional creatures, but women's brains, the way that our brains fire and process things, we are so much more emotionally driven that energy in our system, incredible transformational good or mastitis and show up with disharmony and dysfunction. And one of the places that we really hold on to this, and this is why pelvic steaming also is so incredibly powerful for this kind of transformational change in someone's life, is you're moving energy, fluids, all these things through your pelvis and your womb space and this incredible seat of your identity and your creative energy. One of your perineum that's getting a lot of love and attention from pelvic steaming is a low point that moves things that are stuck. You get huge emotional releases. And it's that point that I was talking about, that low point runs right through the whole front midline of your body. It runs through your uterus. Like, it's incredibly powerful, folks. So a big part of our transformation in our health journey is dealing with emotions and old stuff and energetic blockages. And that does aspects of what creates the root cause behind why symptoms show up. So Chinese medicine believes in this root and branch theory that, if you nourish the roots of the plant is going to flourish. And if there's anything that is at the root cause that is in best good of the body, then you're going to have branches or symptoms that are showing up that point to what's going on at the root. And that can and often does have a big emotional, energetic component. So I wanted to share my experience because I think it is incredibly powerful to be a product of what you preach, right? I've been referring people to pelvic PTs for years. I understand their gifts. I think that they're a very, very valuable part of a woman's, yet I had never prioritized myself enough to be able to go see one. And so now that I have, this is something that I'm going to make sure is a regular part of my self-care because things come up, life triggers you, you pack things back into that junk room and then there's no room for anything else. And frankly, I don't want the past garbage to stifle my creativity. I don't want it to be a roadblock and stand in the way of the things that I want to give to the world. So, you are having physical symptoms like leaking or pain with sex or tight hips that's restricting movement, things of this nature, please go see a pelvic PT. Like I said in the show notes, I'm going to include those 2 directories that Emily provided of places where she's received additional training. So those are going to be practitioners that are pelvic PTs, but like-minded and similar approaches. But please seek out a pelvic PT. I highly encourage it from a structural perspective. Life things change. There's so many things that are constantly fluid in a woman's life, up to and including her hormones throughout the entire month. Changes happen. And so pulling this modality into your life and getting regular maintenance is just going to help you thrive and flourish. So for more information, check out the show notes. I highly, highly encourage you to seek out a pelvic PT and all of the gifts that they can. And I just want to say thank you again to Dr. Emily Wilson for sharing her light and her gifts and her incredible knowledge as a practitioner with me, both as a professional being on the show and with referrals, but also as a practitioner who really held space and cared for me and saw me in a way that I needed to be seen so that I could show up in my highest and best good. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Join us next week.
Thank you, Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist, herbalist, sound healer, and Chinese nutritional therapist Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment with Adrienne for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like us and follow Moon Essence Me. Thank you all for your continued support.